Welcome, everyone. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara. I'm a founder and director at Fortuna Admissions, and I'm thrilled today to be here with Karla Cohen, who has had a variety of opportunities and experiences within MBA admissions and is coming to us most recently from the Harvard Admissions Office. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with her today and to ask her a couple of pointed questions that might be on your mind as well. Karla, I'm going to start this morning with some strategy and recommendations for how to handle the letters of recommendation
Mm-hmm.
and those kinds of support materials coming in for the application.
Fantastic.
Great. So anything in particular that you'd like to point out to our viewers about what they should keep in mind when working on those letters?
Yes, I think it's really important. First and foremost, I think a lot of top business schools, Harvard included, would prefer to actually hear from direct supervisors if at all possible. So it's less important to get someone who's extremely senior or has a fancy title than someone who's actually seen you develop and grow or been responsible for that development and growth. And they can comment with detail as well as enthusiasm, hopefully. So one of the pieces of advice that I often give applicants is when they're asking the recommenders about the process is to not just ask about a letter of recommendation, like, can you do this for me, but can you offer me a strong letter of recommendation? I think adding that strong into their, like, engaging their reaction can tell you a lot. But the ideal scenario is whoever's closest to you, they have to be senior to you, preferably your direct supervisor or your boss's boss. There are situations in which many applicants can't get a direct letter of recommendation because, outside of consulting and some other sectors, it's not a model that many companies would espouse or necessarily offer. So you don't want to put your job at risk in terms of asking someone or, before you have admission anywhere. So in some cases, you have to go back to previous companies and previous supervisors, and that's okay. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but a deal breaker, especially outside of those situations. But you want to make sure and explain that in the application, that's why you sought previous recommenders. Oftentimes applications will have an additional information section so that essentially you'll be able to put your best foot forward.
And what do you do if you don't have someone that you're asking currently? How do you generally suggest that students manage that issue?
I mean, I think this is where you really need to tap into your networking or start to develop your networking skills in terms of reaching out to people that you worked with previously who are, in a position basically being further down the road than you are. So maybe it's someone who is on a pathway that you want to follow post MBA. Look through your LinkedIn network. Who do you know who's maybe even at a company that you want to essentially target after your business school process? Reach out to them and see if they're in a position to be able to talk to you, to speak up for you. Depends on how they know you. So you don't want to have just some random person writing a letter of recommendation for you.
Right.
So they need to be able to talk about your potential, your development, and speak with detail. It's all in the details, which is essentially evidence. You don't want a laundry list of adjectives about you. So like, this person is ambitious and bright, has leadership skills, without any evidence to support that. But if they're in a position to say, as someone who, maybe they're even a graduate of school, as someone who's actually, in a position to understand the community and the culture and fit, as well as be able to ascertain, as someone who recruits people, this person's level of intellect, as well as leadership potential and other soft skills that are very difficult to kind of tease out from an application form. That's incredibly valuable and helpful in terms of helping the admissions committee essentially, see, are you who you say you are in terms of how you present yourself, and are the skills that you've identified indeed skills that other people who are more senior to you, who've worked with you or have had direct contact with you, been able to validate.
So I want to clarify, these are people that have had direct contact with you, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So in thinking about how to best prepare these recommender writers, what
Mm-hmm.
are some of the tips that you generally share with applicants about, well, how do you get these folks ready? What are the best ways to understand that they're busy people, they're doing you a pretty big favor, and how do you prepare them and keep them on track without hovering too much and making them feel like they've got homework to do?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a bit of an art to that for sure. But I think first and foremost, ask them, what can I do to help facilitate this process for you, in terms of what do you need to be able to answer these questions? And so one of the best things that you can do is, figure out what are the questions that they're going to be asked. Sometimes recommenders are like, done this a million times, they know exactly what to do. and they will be very direct in terms of instructing you as to what they need, if anything. In other cases, it might be completely new endeavor for them. So you're going to need to provide them a lot of input. So I think it's good to have an initial conversation where you talk to them about their experience writing letters of recommendation, and then ask them, what can I do to essentially help? Because I know that this is an incredibly big ask on my part. And then look at and make a list. Talk about, here are some core things, like help provide that evidence for them that they may have seen but have forgotten. I led this initiative, I did this, that, and the other, and provide those examples for them so that they can take those examples and then turn them into letters with actual support. So you want to give them essentially the facts of, like, these are the things that I've done, a list of accomplishments and achievements that you've done that is connected to them, that they've had visibility on. And then oftentimes there's a question around feedback, which is really important. A lot of schools do have this question across, top schools, but Harvard included. And that's a critical question, because you want to avoid having that be one where it's sort of like a non-real example. And what I mean by that is, like, oh, this person, like, I told them they could improve their communication skills. Like, that's too vague. And that's also not really, anyone can improve their communication skills. I don't care if you're Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, certainly Mark Zuckerberg could use some help. Not to disparage him at all, but I think that's something that, again, it's not specific enough and it's overdone. And so I think the recommendation itself can gain tremendous credibility when you actually highlight an example of something that happened. So talk about different times. Look back at performance reviews. When did you fall short? Everybody falls short. So, like, don't be afraid to highlight where you stumbled, and then, had someone basically point out to you, because anyone who cares about you as a manager is going to tell you when you're doing something wrong, or where you could improve. And then they're also looking for a lack of defensiveness. So they want the situation to essentially be described in terms of how feedback was given. And then with as much detail as possible, in the sense of, this person once had to give a presentation and totally froze. And so we've, like, talk about that kind of feedback and how that person has essentially prepared for, and even solicited feedback in terms of, like, continued feedback in terms of, am I getting better? Am I improving? Because any great leader is someone who isn't against identifying their blind spots. So you want people who are open to, where are my blind spots? Help me mitigate those, help me deal with those and manage those. And those are the individuals who make the best leaders. And that's what schools are looking for. If you've never been given feedback directly about how to improve, the chances are that, you're not really pushing yourself hard enough, or something's wrong. Something's wrong, because we're all human and we all make mistakes and we need to grow. And that's oftentimes what business schools are looking for, is like, how have you grown? And how have you managed whatever issue? Even if it's an ongoing issue, how do you keep it in check? Whether it's attention to detail or meeting deadlines, seeing the big picture. You're great at seeing the big picture, but things can fall apart in terms of, like, the details. That's something that often happens. Using specific examples of that, I think, can help. So that would be my advice, is to sit down with them, make a list, talk through the different examples, and get buy-in, essentially, because they may see things that you haven't seen in the list that you provided, and vice versa. So, you want that to be a conversation. And then again, you want to be sort of a partner in this process to help facilitate it. Not that you're going to spoon feed them the material that they're going to write. You want them to be able to do that on their own, so that it's an authentic letter of recommendation. But you do want to support them in terms of, like, they're probably very busy people, as Judith said. So you want to help them essentially get to the core content that's going to be helpful to the committee.
I like what you said about it being like a non-issue. Like, you have to make, like, improve communication skills. Like, that is so vague, and that's very hard to,
Who doesn't, get that feedback and support? So it actually, like, you're missing an opportunity to give the rest of your letter of recommendation credibility. When I was on the admission side of the world, whenever I saw, like, a detailed, where they did highlight failures and flaws that the person had addressed and worked on, everything that they said about the individual that was wonderful had more power and more weight. If it seemed like they were like, no observed weaknesses, I was like, I'm not sure I believe all this other stuff, because who doesn't have weaknesses? Who doesn't have room for development and improvement? So I think it's important to really look at, like, honestly, where have you fallen in terms of, made mistakes, or had a pattern of behavior that you needed to correct? Like, all of those things are really rich material that also help the committee understand who you are. And also that self-awareness is important too, is that you have to be open to being able to receive criticism in order to be able to, essentially be a good self-assessor.
I think that's wonderful advice, and I'm so glad you were able to share it with us this morning. So thank you, everybody, for viewing this terrific interaction that we've had with Karla Cohen of Fortuna Admissions, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Bye, Judith.